Hello everyone, this is King and Vizeron here, and I'm back with another NeverWinter video. Now, as the title of this video states, I will be giving 5 changes that I believe are required for the game. Now, I'm going to start with the, I guess, most well-accepted ones, and then I will also state which ones I believe are more so opinionated and which ones are more so fact, as in Cryptic needs to change it. So the 5 topics that I want to look over are class balance, companions, enemy balance, stats, and finally self-sufficiency. I'll get more into specific points later on in the video, and I realize that some of these seem extremely broad, but I will in fact go deeper down and break them down into pieces. So starting off with class balance, the main thing I want to talk about are powers and in fact a bit of stat balance. Now, stat balance will be later on for the stats in the video, and then we will start off with powers. Now, before I actually go any further, I just want to do a quick disclaimer. None of this is bashing on Cryptic or stuff like that. It's simply just test, and you do have to take into account this is taken from a 19,000 item level character. I can hit 19,300 if I actually put an enchantment there. So a lower item level, mid-range item level character, and this is just what I've tested. Now, I know I've seen other people, and once you hit those higher item levels, things definitely do become easier, but I also need to just state lower levels also need to play the game as well, and there are people that don't even have proper builds as myself, which I will show later on in the video, and you know, some changes need to be done to compensate for less higher up their characters. So starting off first thing with the powers, as we said, I'm just going to go with balance. Now, the balance in the game is not bad overall. I believe the developers here did a good job, but there are certain powers here that are, well, useless, and one of these would be Into the Fray. Now, the amount of times I've ever had to use this are 0, and the reason for that being is it's just severely underwhelming. Throughout the entirety of the game, as you can see here in the gameplay, there is no point ever where I ever need to regain stamina to build up my vengeance, which is what gives you higher DPS as a fighter. And the amount of times, even as you can see here, where I'm fighting a bunch of enemies, the amount of DPS that an actual damaging attack does, it just outweighs gaining that in such a long second, a long 20-second cooldown. So there's no point where positive will ever really outweigh its cost or its cons. The other powers will always be better, and I realize that there's always going to be a best in power. Stuff like Anvil of Doom will always be a good power, and it will out DPS many of the others. But that does not mean to say that some of them are completely and utterly useless, such as Into the Fray. I can see this being a lot better for a tank, but not for the DPS. Additionally, the other thing I wanted to cover would be Cleave. Cleave does not do anything near the amount of damage as Reef does, and as you can see here, I just go along and I add up the running totals. This was the one with the highest amount of damage. As you can see, the crit there, 2,500, now it's 4,000, and then the running total is currently at 12,000. Well, basically, I just kept adding those up until I got a total of 24,405, which was the highest of Reeve's damage. And then here I did the same thing. As you can see, I added up the crit. There it's 2,000, disappears. New crit, I would add up that 1,300 and add that onto the running total. And I got the highest total of 16,840. And just for the comparison's sake, I did this 3 times with both, where Cleave had the lowest at 14,775 and its highest at almost 17,000. And then with Reeve had its lowest at 20,727 and its highest at 24,405, meaning Reeve at its lowest out DPS to Cleave. And the thing is, I realized that it does say it has a higher magnitude, so most people would just come to the conclusion, hey, it does more damage. I just wanted to test it. I unequip my companion, unequip some of the enchantments on my flame enchantment, just to see pure damage and remove other factors. And Reeve does more damage. It hits basically the same amount of targets. If there's a group of 4 or 5 targets, Reeve will hit them all, just like Cleave would. And it has range, so there's literally no point in using Cleave whatsoever. It's basically useless, and it doesn't have any adverse effects, well, I guess positive effects, not adverse, where it gives you like stamina gain or something like that, like it used to, which is why some people would use it over Weapon Master Strike back in the day. And speaking of that, now I want to go into the fact of powers that were removed. Some of these powers would be Lunging Strike, Weapon Master Strike, what is it, Crushing Blow, I think it was called, where it would heal you over time. We did get some new powers, but we lost some of the old ones. And I know I can't speak for every single class, but especially as a Guardian fighter, turned into a fighter now, some of my favorite encounter powers were removed from the game. Now I realize that they cannot add them back the exact same they were, and I realize that they have the same amount of encounter powers as they do at wills with both the classes, but I don't think anybody would complain if, let's say, the DPS had one more encounter power than the tank for fighters, like if they added Lunging Strike and some of those back. And that's the second thing I wanted to get into with the powers. I honestly believe that for all classes, not just fighters, I'm just using this because, fighter was my main, it's the one I've invested over 2,000 hours in game into, and therefore I have the most experience with it, and I just really think that the powers that we used to have should be added back. I mean, I remember that Weapon Master Strike was slightly different than the Great Weapon Fighter's variant of it. It would attack at like 75% of the speed, and then the Great Weapon Fighter would attack at 50% of the speed, and then when he would go Berserker mode, when his determination would fill up, it would go at 100% of the speed, so there was a little bit of variation there. And other classes probably have they definitely do have encounter powers and stuff like that removed. I just can't think of many off the top of my head. I think Flourish was also removed from the fighter and stuff like that. So, just a quick recap of my first point would be to, one, balance powers, maybe not to make them best in slot, but at least make them viable. So, stuff like Into the Fray definitely needs to be adjusted and stuff like that. And then the second one would be any powers that you remove, such as Lunging Strike, Flourish, Weapon Master Strike from the classes. They should be reintegrated, even if it means an uneven number of powers and stuff like that. I personally don't think anybody would complain about having more things to test and more things to use. Now, speaking of testing and using, we will move on to companions. Now, companions is a little bit shorter. I shouldn't talk about this too much. I know a lot of hardcore endgame players, such as the Assist Man. I'll give a shout out to him because I've been watching a lot of his videos recently, and him and other YouTubers that I've seen have said that some companion powers do not work. Now, personally, I've tested about 5 or 6 of them, not that many, and the ones that I have tested have worked, but one thing that I do want to talk about is DPS tanking and healing the companion passive powers. So as you can see here, my tank has 3 defense slots, 1 offense, and 1 utility, whereas in this here, my Scourge Warlock has 3 offense, 1 defense, and 1 utility, And it's the same thing with Hunter, Ranger, and Control Wizard. They have 3 offensive, 1 defensive, and 1 utility. Now the reason I'm bringing this up is just simply because if you're a DPS class, I believe that you should be able to equip 3 offensive and then 1 defensive and 1 utility. And that goes for any class regardless of if they can be a tank or not. And then if you are a tank, like the Guardian, like the Fighter, the Barbarian, or the Paladin, all 3 of those have 3 defensive slots, 1 power, and 1 utility, regardless of their role. And I just think that that's lazy coding, since they just set it up to whatever class you are, you get 3 defensive, and then, 1 offense and 1 utility. But I really think that DPSs should get 3 offensive, tanks should get 3 defensive, and then I don't know what the cleric has, but just, for consistency's sake, we'll just say healers have 3 utility. And I feel like that's how it should be regardless of your class. Because, I want to maximize DPS and stuff on my fighter or even on my barbarian, and I'm just limited by only having, 1 offensive slot. So I just think that's unfair. So, to recap companions, like I said, this one isn't that long. Companions should, 1, have all of their powers and their passive perks working properly, and then 2, I believe that DPS, healing, and tanking should have more, strict or more proper forms of their abilities. And then this is just a side note on the companion thing. This isn't really important in any way, but I think they should revert the kobolds' original appearance, because as you can see here, this is how they used to look, and then right here is how they look now. And I don't know, I personally just preferred the old one. This is just a silly thing. But now we'll hop into the third point. Now, just real quickly before I jump into the third point, now that I was on the thing of appearance, is the given fact of pressing triangle to preview how mounts look, or companions, does not work. It doesn't matter if you go to collections or go to the trade house. Now, I know this isn't that big of a deal, but a lot of the times I do like to inspect mounts, especially before buying them, so I can see how they look. I know you can just Google it, but it was a feature that worked before in-game, and I believe it should work now. Now, anyways, let's hop back into the third point of balancing in-game. Now, starting off with enemy balancing. Now, again, take this hopefully with a grain of salt, because this is coming from a 19k item level character who used to be able to properly tank and effectively deal with enemies in every single queue up to, I guess, Tomb of the Nine Gods. I can do everything, including Tomb of the Nine Gods, effectively as a 13.5k tank. And by effectively, I mean I could effectively tank with my tank build, and if I used my noble gear, which is my all-purpose build, I could tank and do good DPS. Now, as you can see here, they changed Demogorgon. Unlike before, where you could just avoid his red thing, it tracks you indefinitely. And because of that, it becomes extremely unbalanced in the sense of tanking. Like, you'll see this later on in the clip. We completely and utterly annihilate the next 2, like Demogorgon and his horn buddy, whatever the heck its name is, the second and third phase of Demogorgon, and it's just so easy to do. But this first phase is just dumb. It's still not properly balanced from the PC. And as far as Demogorgon goes, his gaze just shouldn't follow you. As you can see, I'm barely able to, remove his gaze, and then with the stun and stuff like that, like, it's just not a good experience. I could tank this guy before. Yeah, he was a little bit too easy before, but I mean now it's just dumb how the balancing works. And I mean, this goes with other stuff as well. In the clip that I'm gonna show shortly after, like, you can see that my tank right here, he effectively deals with these enemies in the forest, this underground forest level in Undermountain. The name currently is not in my head, but I effectively and easily deal with the enemies. But then in this clip over here where I was doing it with my friend, the required item level to go into Undermountain is only, I think, 9,000 or like 13,000. It's something extremely low. It's not even 13,000, it's lower than that. And then you can go in it at a level 70, but as you see here, we're just getting annihilated by the ads just because of... And this is why people like were complaining and stuff, saying, oh, the campaign's too hard. Now, if you go in with your high endgame characters, such as my my Guardian fighter, my fighter, it's extremely easy. You just pump stop all the enemies. It's not even a challenge. And that's why I saw other YouTubers, they're like, what do you mean this is hard? It's so easy. And especially if you go in not straight from level 7, if you go as a higher level. As you can see in that clip, like, it's just brutal, and they need to balance that. There's a few enemies, you know, Demogorgon's first phase comes to mind, and the actual campaign needs to be balanced to be easier for lower levels. I realize that that'll make it extremely easy for higher endgame players, but I mean, it needs to be done. Apart from that, there's not much else I can really say. You can just see the clip here rolling of how we're just annihilating the thing in Demogorgon. So, you know, they've done a lot of good as far as balancing goes, but they definitely need to balance a few other things. Here with Orcus, you can see that it just takes me forever to kill these ads, and I mean, they need to balance that as well. Like, before they didn't used to have the gold bar, that way healers and tanks could easily kill them. I remember it would take me less than 10 seconds to kill them, and here, you know, I have to legit get other people to help. Now, I know I might not have the best tank build. I still need to, you know, research and test some things, but balancing needs to be done. I mean, I'm just going to say it like it is. There's two options. One, you can have lower item levels and stuff like that be able to complete your content, or B, you can have it that higher levels are able to fairly easily complete your content, and the lower levels are going to struggle. And by lower level, I mean lower item. And that's the way they have it set up right now. I feel like they just equip their characters in their testing with 22k, 23k, close to best in slot gear, ran through all the activities. They're like, yep, this is fairly easy. And then they just completely and utterly disregarded any characters 19k or below item level. And it shows. It shows. And they definitely need to balance that. Another thing is, when you go into item queues, before when you would run like Temple of the Spider or Orcus, your item level would stay. So if I was a 13,000 item level character, and I did Orcus, I'd have 13,000 item level stats. Now it gets scaled down, as you can see, like here in Merchant's Prince Folly, it gets scaled down to its item level, which also makes activities harder than they need to be. And a simple fix would just be increase the cap. You know, if the activity's 13,000, change it to 15,000 of what you get scaled down to. That way higher levels make it easier. Like the Many Coins Bank, which people said was a pathetic thing before, is now just, it's not doable. I can, at 6 million damage by the end of the third phase, and then I look at my teammates, they have about 2 million. Anybody who does less than about 5 million can't do that activity. You just can't. The amount of damage you do is just, it's not possible. I could see a full team of people with 5 million plus fairly easily running through, but a random queue, you know, which is what 75% of the community does, they just queue up randomly, that's why times, and that's why it's in the game, it's just not possible, and the developers extremely overlook that. So that's just my main point for, as far as enemy balancing goes, because it needs to be done. Now on to stats. Now I realized that a lot of this was done, and once you do hit those stat caps of 68,000 for everything except for crit avoidance, which is 73,000, and then, you know, combat advantage, which is like 118,000, which is what most people say you need that to be above. Awareness is at 78,000. Power doesn't have a cap like before, and then the rest cap off at 68,000 for the hardest difficulty. For actual level 80 content, it's like 60,000 for most of the stuff, so if you have over 60,000, you're fine. And that does work with higher levels. I've seen some 22k plus tanks and stuff like that, and their defense and stuff, it works fine. Now there's also a bunch of higher levels that I've seen, which I actually will show clips near the end, just showing comparisons of my DPS in comparison to some 22k plus stuff, just to show that I'm not complaining because I'm a lower item level. It's because it's just not actually balanced. So I will be showing that later on in the video. But like for now, you know, before stats used to mean something on armor. You know, now like I don't get a point of having the like different types here. Like I realize they look different, but their stats are the exact same, and their passive perks are the exact same, which was the case before. But you know, before there was actually there was a meaning between ward and raid gear. Like there was actually a stat difference, and I will roll a clip showing the difference between the stats of my characters. And I know a lot of the stuff was just under the hood. I mean, like, you know, the stats were fairly similar, and then the feats and stuff would mean, but you know, stats actually used to mean something, and like the names of stuff. Now every single class just has this. It's capped off at 50%, which, I mean, before they actually used to have the percent numbers show, which they don't anymore, which is just dumb. I honestly think that they should say, hey, this is a plus 63% power boost like it used to. But yeah, that needs to be changed. So as you can see here, my character's power is at 26k, you know, crit at 8, 5, 6k basically, and then 16,000 defense, and then deflect 6,000, regen, and then my tank build, the stats are significantly different. Now I did have higher enchantments on the other one, which is why some things are off here and there, but you see power's a lot lower, defense is a lot higher. You know, there's actually a point to stuff. And as you can see here, which I don't think I go slow enough, but you know, it showed like damage dealt, damage taken minus 54%. You know, it would actually tell you the stuff that it did. And you know, that was good. That it showed you what stuff did, and I really think that should be put back. Now this last part is just kind of, I guess, more controversial as to stats, but I honestly believe accuracy should be removed from game. The other stats are okay. You know, we lost our life steal, recovery, and regen, 3 stats, and they got replaced with 3 new stats as critical avoidance, accuracy, and then awareness. Those were the stats that were replaced. And as you can see there in the Merchant Prince Folly, the amount of enemies that can actually deflect your attacks are minimal. There's the T-Rex there in Merchant Prince's Folly. There's this one green golem in the mission where you fight the fairy boss or whatever. And then Kabir can do it in Spellplate Cavern, the first fire boss, I believe that's his name. But I mean, you can never damage him before, and he deflects for 0, just like the boss, the golem, the second golem, before you fight that fairy boss. So those two don't really count. And then I don't know if Lair of the Mad Mage, the only other level 80 content, has stuff that can deflect. But when the shield comes up, that means they deflect. Oh, the Kukatoa also deflect. And there's only 2 things in the entire game, other than the final dungeon, that are able to deflect your attacks. And the given fact that you have a full stat that is useless 90% of the time is just dumb. Now, I could be mistaken. It could be that when your accuracy is just so high, it doesn't even show the blue shield. But then why would certain characters like the Golem, like the Golem, he shows 0s when he deflects you. Or like the Kukatoa, when your deflection's high enough, they show 0s as well. So why, like, I don't get it. I don't, like, it's just a stat that's not useful at all for like 90% of the game. And it's just, I don't know, it's just not a good stat to have. So I realize perhaps with other fixes and stuff, but I could just clearly see a lot of the stuff that I had stated before in the video. If they just drop accuracy, which I believe is the one that, you know, blocks your enemy's chance of deflection, they just remove that. And balance out the stats, you know, equally distribute them among the other stuff, a lot of the stuff I said before, like enemy balancing and stuff, won't even need to be done, because you'll just have, more power, more combat advantage, more stuff in like crit avoidance. It's just going to be easier to hit those caps. And then, a stat that is useless, to be honest, for 90% of the content. Like, I don't see a purpose of having a stat like that in there. Okay, so now I'm just going to show the self-healing along with proof. Now, I know that the proof isn't really necessary, it increases the duration of the video, but it's just mainly for comments and stuff, just to avoid those. So as you can see here, I'm holding the aggro, and I basically gain my super indefinitely, which you can also see in some Orcus clips and stuff before, and I realized when my teammates died, that's just because of AoE, if you're holding aggro, they're still going to take damage. But yeah, see, as you can see, healing was broken, and this isn't even the most broken clip. I had others, but I had deleted them to clear up storage on my space, and this one just happened to survive. Now I'm going to show some of the mod 16, that's the one we're on, clips of DPS. Now, this is in 2x speed, so hopefully most of these don't go by too fast, but as you can see there was a 22k item level character. So the 22k there out DPS'd me. Here this is in regular speed. I out DPS'd everyone here. Not too many high item levels. Just overall showing, just clips in general. And then for the ×2, if you do use the YouTube 0.5 speed, I realize that my voice will sound slowed down and really weird. But at least you'll be able to see some clips. Here again, top of the DPS board, some 19k. This is a buddy of mine, Dark Revenant. You've seen him a bunch of times. He's one of my friends that plays NeverWinter. And there I am, 19k, and I out DPS'd other 19ks. Here was a gold, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the one with a 22.5k flat. As you can see right there, Barbarian, and I out DPS'd him greatly. And then a tank who is a lot higher item level, and then a wizard who out DPS'd me. And I was only at 17k at the time. Now, the translation between my item level from 17k to like 19k hasn't increased that much, but it has a fair bit. And then these are just, the weekly stuff which I've shown a bunch throughout the video, and there was a purpose. It's to see if I could still one-shot them and finish like Big Grin. I would do it under 15 seconds and stuff like that. Bahamut, I think it is, I would also kill him very quickly, which I also showed in the video, and he dies very quickly. And then there I used to one-shot him with Commander Strike after hitting him with one tide of iron. And that's why I hit him with the heavy slash, to see that. And then here is just to show, me tanking, and then this is old stuff, mod 15 and earlier. This is just showing stats there, not at the top of the DPS. Here we had a buddy of mine carrying, but as you can see I was second place in DPS. So this is just to show that 13k was sufficient before to very much carry in the old dungeons. 12-minute run, that's a quick run, and I'm first place in DPS. Right here, regular 16-minute run, I'm not first place, but it's just there to show. There, look at that DPS. The guy said this makes me sad because of the DPS I had done there. And I was like, yeah, the other people are... Because I do get upset when I do carry, like severely. There, I had done first place DPS, everybody else just hadn't done proper builds. There again, second place, good 12-minute run, that's a quick run. And bear in mind, all of these are while I'm tanking. In Demogorgon, right here, where I'm 30 million and the first place is 32, I tanked Demogorgon the first round. My DPS for the first round was 0. So that DPS was built up during the second and third round. And that is the case with all Demogorgon DPS clips you see. Here I was soloing him, and I'm a bit of an asshat here, and I said, you're welcome. But I mean, when I carry and stuff like that, and it's like bad, I tend to get upset. And I know people say, just to find actual good people to play the game with. But I mean, there's a queue for a reason, and I just use it. It doesn't work out the majority of the time. There you can see long dungeon. I think I was only like 8k item level. Once I could do Temple of the Spider, I stopped. There I am, gold reward, second place DPS. That's tanking Demogorgon. So basically, I'm just gonna let the rest of these roll in the background. I'm not gonna keep talking. and I'm actually just going to talk about self-healing. Now, self-healing is a problem. It's a problem for any character lower than 20k item level. And as you can see, I'm going to keep rolling the clips. You could look at the DPS and the stats yourself. I was a good player before, still am now. I look for stats, I try and build the best thing possible. And self-healing right now is lacking. Not everyone has a stockpile of 8 greater stones of health like I do in my bank, just sitting there. Not everybody has that. And not everybody is, I don't know, self-healing just is non-existent. And I know a lot of people say, you know, get the Barbarians thing, which gives you 1% health with every crit. And yeah, those things help, but they're not good enough. And I honestly just don't think that you should have to have greater stones of health equipped in your potion tree. You didn't have to before, and you shouldn't have to now. Yeah, I mean, that's the most blunt, straightforward way I could say it. There needs to be some way of self-healing, especially for lower levels. I realize once you get up there, I've looked at videos, people can even solo dungeons. Somebody soloed Castle Never as a Scourge Warlock. It's doable, but at higher item levels, like I said, the developers neglected, I'd say anything 20k and below, and they also neglected certain powers, you know, like those, when they ran dungeons, nobody as a fighter or DPS was using Into the Fray, and stuff like that, which I mentioned way at the beginning of the video if you're still watching at this point. Like, there just needs to be some sort of balance, self-healing, something, be it like every 10 seconds you're in combat, you heal 5% of your health, which is pretty balanced on the given fact that the Barbarians thing gives you 1% for every time you crit. So there just needs to be something, some more balance in the game, especially for lower levels. So, quick recap of the entirety of the video. Number 1, powers. You need to rebalance quite a few of them. I know that this applies to all classes. Reintroduction of old powers that are removed, like Weapon Master Strike and Flourish. Doesn't matter if they're uneven, I honestly don't think anybody would complain about having new powers. So I believe everybody can agree with me on the first point. Number 2, companions. Again, I believe nobody will complain that some companion stats need to be fixed. And then as far as the 3 passive perks go, you know, the offense, defense, and utility, well, I guess not 3, 5, those should be more catered to whatever class you play as. You know, a DPS gets 3, tank gets, DPS gets 3 offense. A tank gets 3 defense, and a healer 3 utility, just for argument's sake, or, you know, if offense actually happens to be better for healing than, you know, offense, or, you know, same thing with defense, whatever happens to be best for healing. So, you know, companion passives, I honestly feel they should be more catered, rather than, I would say, lazy code of just having it set to Guardian fighters always have 3, and stuff like that. Anyways. Third point, enemies. There are enemies in the game that need to be balanced. I showed 9,000, level 70 item, level 70 as a 9,000 item level is the bare minimum, the requirement, the recommended for Undermountain. And I was going in as a 13k great weapon fighter, and you saw in that one clip that I showed, you get annihilated. There's a reason people complain on the forums and on YouTube comments and stuff, and why there's a lot of negativity, I would say. I wouldn't say toxicity or stuff like that, but there's a lot of negativity towards this game because of that. Because they neglected, like I said, I doubt any of the developers ran the Undermountain campaign as 9,000 item level characters. I doubt any of them actually used the gear that drops. They probably just had, like, my fighter right here, as you're seeing, they probably just had all the boons, doohickeys, you know, owl bears, stones of health, stuff like that. They probably ran it with a group of players, and then they're just like, yeah, this is balanced. So, you know, enemy balancing needs to be done not only in the campaign, but in certain things such as Demogorgon, the bank heist. I showed you, like, if you don't do more than 5 million damage, like I was doing 6 million in that one clip, I have the clips of me doing over 6 million damage. You can't do it. Like, no low-level people will be able to do it. It's just not possible. It's not feasible. Number 4. Stats. Stats used to be more important than they were before. And at the bare minimum, I do think that they should at least have the thing where I realize the cap for crit is 50%, the cap for defense removal is 50%, the cap for deflection, I believe, is 50%. Like, a lot of the stuff is just capped at 50% and stuff like that. Armor penetration, I don't know what its cap is, but 60,000 is max for level 80 content, 68,000 for Lair of the Mad Mage. I realize it has caps and stuff like that, but showing a percent would not hurt. Before it would say, with my power, it'd be like, hey, you're getting 70% more extra damage. And before you would see like variety, my tank would have lower power stats than my great weapon fighter would, even though the item level was different, because gears had different variety. So I do believe that stats need to be fixed, not only when you're matchmaking, like I said, if Merchant Prince of the Folly is 11,000 item level group, or Q I should say, and like Temple of the Spider and some of those I believe 12,000, your character should at least be 3,000 higher, opposed to 2,000 that it is now, because I had looked at numerous dungeons by solo queuing, and the general thing is you're 2,000 item level higher than what the queue states. So some balancing there towards stats, especially catered towards lower levels, needs to be done. And then finally is just self-healing. Perhaps if you do the other 4 things I mentioned in the video, you won't need self-healing. It's highly likely that you won't even need self-healing. If you remove accuracy stat, like I said, and I don't know, maybe somebody comes along and says, hey, just because they don't show they're not deflecting, like right here, they still are, and stuff like that. I don't know. In which case, that's an error in their animation and like pop-up interface. But anyways, back on track with self-healing. It might not be required, like I said, if you do the other 4, if you balance some enemies, increase the stat cap for certain Qs so that it doesn't nerf you as much, fix some of the companion things, fix some of the powers, add some of the old ones, just improve the game in other ways that I don't think anybody will really complain about. If you just fix stuff there, then, perhaps you can keep accuracy and stuff like that, and you can keep all the stats just the way they are, but it'll work a lot better with just a few balance features here and there. Yeah, and then you might not even need self-healing. Regardless, that's what they need to do. Those are some things. Other things are more important than others. Please let me know your opinions in the comment section. Thank you very much if you did watch up all the way to this, and I'll see you in the next video.